Pressure's on now.
On me or you?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this hearing of the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, June 17th, 2013. So far, I don't have any public comment cards, so I want to remind anyone who's here who would like to speak either on an agenda item or on any matter within the jurisdiction of the committee to please fill out a white comment card and bring it forward. And we're going to be taking the closed session items 1 through 8. We're going to hold those for the moment because I think we can finish our regular agenda hopefully quite quickly. I'd like to propose items number 10 and 11 as consent candidates, and if
So moved on
by the
my
way,
end.
I guess I should say I'm Paul Krikorian, chair of the committee. I'm joined by Mr. Rosendahl and Mr. Karetz, and there being no comment on items 10 and 11, it will be the action of the committee by consent to approve those reports. That brings us then to regular agenda item 9.
Item number 9 is the Los Angeles Housing Department and City Administrative Officer reports relative to formally recognizing $682,480 in settlement agreement proceeds resulting from a suit brought forth by the City Attorney, the Attorneys General of 26 states against GE Funding Capital Market Services Incorporated.
And thank you very much for that, Ms. Maeda. I take it back. We're going to go actually out of order to number 12 first.
Okay.
So let's do 12 first, and then we'll come back and do 9. But
Item
that was
number-
a very good job of introducing it. You can forego it the next time later.
Thank you. Item number 12 is the City Administrative Officer and General Services Department reports in response to the motion from Council Members Wesson and Karetz relative to developing a financially sustainable green retrofit program for city-owned facilities.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Jason with the CEO's report. By adopting the recommendation, you would designate a special fund to implement and expand the city's green retrofit and workforce program. And you would also incorporate the green retrofit workforce program as part of the city's budget process. And then you allow the fund and the mayor's office and general services to develop alternative funding opportunities to further the program. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Karetz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very pleased to have seconded this motion because I believe the city has to maintain leadership on greening the environment and mitigating the impacts we've had on our natural environment. And in fact, today I'll have to leave shortly to vote on something similar, a special session of the E&E committee to discuss banning plastic bags in Los Angeles. So it's great to make this a very environmental afternoon. I wonder if you could please walk us through what the program has done and especially how this has been a factor in LA becoming a greener city.
Thank you, Mr. Karetz. My name is Teresa Sanchez. I'm with the Mayor's Office, and I direct the Green Retrofit and Workforce Program. This program was created by ordinance in 2009. It was part of a very unique public policy campaign that was led by a coalition of community labor and environmental organizations to create an opportunity for the city as the largest property owner within the city to convert its buildings or upgrade buildings for energy efficiency, water conservation, and to do it as a workforce development piece for city residents. Since I've been on board in 2010, we've upgraded over 52 city buildings that were targeted based on audits to be able to achieve. We were able to seed the program initially through ARA funds, through the Department of Energy funds that were made available to the city through the Energy Efficiency Block Grant Program, as well as the Qualified Energy Conservation Block Program. So those buildings were targeted. The ordinance requires that we target buildings over 7,500 square feet, built before 1975. And the federal government had requirements that we achieve at least 20% energy efficiency on each of the buildings. So far we've managed over $26 million of those grant funds. The purpose of this program, we believe we're saving approximately $1 million a year to the general fund at this point. The purpose of this amendment to an existing energy efficiency fund that General Services manages is to be able to broaden the scope of potential revenue sources into the program. So in addition to any grants or loans, such as DWP loans or California Energy Commission loans or any private financing that might be available, any of those funding sources could come in to support the program. And the goal is to expand and ensure the long-term financial sustainability of the program. It would also allow us to, as we identify and verify the savings on each project, we could actually count that back in as savings back into the fund for potential reinvestment in future projects. So the goal of that portion, this portion we're talking about today, is ensuring the long-term financial sustainability. What we've been able to do is reduce greenhouse gases, save the taxpayers money, relieve pressure on the general fund. Ultimately, the goal would be to become completely self-sustaining, at least for this particular green retrofit program, in terms of being able to fund and then also achieve the savings and relieve the burden on the general fund while we are achieving the environmental goals of greenhouse gas reduction, but also making buildings more comfortable and hopefully safer and more efficient for the people that work in them, and also patronize the buildings. We've done a ton of libraries, fire stations, police stations, recreation centers. Another goal of the ordinance is to target high public use buildings, so that we're ensuring that the public at large is also benefiting from these building upgrades.
And do you have an estimate of how much we're expecting to have in the fund after its first year and sort of down the line, maybe after 5 years?
I don't know, Jay. Do we have-
By approving this report, what you will get is, on an annual basis, a report from General Services where they will itemize all the projects that they have implemented. They'll itemize all the savings that has been realized, and they'll make recommendation as to the next phase of the program, so that you have an opportunity to see how the program is going, and they'll request permission for additional projects and where the funding will be coming from.
Do you have a sense of how much will be in the fund after the first year? Do you have any kind of feel for it?
At this point, we know that the current QECB program that we're implementing now, the savings has been starting to realize this year. And hopefully, if it's on track, we'll probably be realizing about $1 million worth of savings per year just from that program. At the same time, the report will provide you with information regarding the debt finance that we incur to implement these projects. So you have all the information to make a decision as to how far and where you would like to have this program go.
Well, I think it's great that this came to us within the budget process and is, in discussion as an efficiency measure. And I give kudos to your department, to both GSD and the CAO for having brought this forward. It's a great program and very exciting.
I'd like to make a comment, and I love it, obviously. We're moving in the right direction as a city, more than most cities in the nation and the world, I might add. And I think the mayor has demonstrated dramatic leadership, and so has the council. So as a start, I want to say that. The creation of a special fund to capture savings from energy and water retrofit projects, with these funds to be used for additional projects. GSD notes that in 2001, the city created the Energy Conservation Loan Program Fund to hold proceeds from LADWP Energy Efficiency Loan Program, and suggest amendments to this fund to use as Green Retrofit Program Fund as envisioned in the motion. Just give us a little bit more on that, but this is great. I love it.
Right. So as you mentioned, this fund has been in existence for a number of years now.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is, there were some limitations with the way the fund was originally set up. It was originally set up to receive Department of Water Power loans to General Services at a rather high interest rate at the time. So one of the things we're attempting to do within this amendment is to renegotiate that agreement with the Department of Water and Power, so that we can access funds at a more reasonable interest rate, a much lower cost, to be able to then get to a larger number of projects. And that source of loans will only be one source. We're also going to continue to look at state grant programs, federal grant programs, looking at potential public-private partnerships in not the bad old ways that have been done in the past, learning some of the lessons from the past to make sure that the city and the public as a whole benefit. So we're trying to make it more expansive, more flexible, more efficient, and probably most importantly, being able to get to a larger scale of projects to be completed simultaneously.
Well, I'm excited about it. I'm enthusiastic about it. We have shown leadership throughout the nation and the world, and we continue to show in this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Englander?
Just a couple of things, and I want to echo that as well. I think there's a great opportunity to invest in green retrofitting and look at potential savings as well as environmental savings. And putting our budget hat on, though, I just have some questions as it pertains to what we consider savings and how we actually look at that savings. And I know there's some examples in the report I'd like to highlight, but look at some of these issues in terms of how we calculate a savings. There's different types of retrofit programs that generate different types of savings. So if it's on the electric side, obviously there's an immediate savings, but it's a one-time savings. So it's 1 year savings, although it's ongoing. If you want to look at it, ongoing savings as well, there's different calculations for that. Have we taken calculations into effect of projected rate increases? Because it would be an offset, and I don't know if we're calling that one-time savings. It's diminished over time if there are rate increases over time, which there will be both on the water and power side. Are we calculating that into what we're calling a savings?
The initial savings that you see in the report was based on when the first QECP was adopted. And there we just looked at the straight line because, like you said, there are too many variables that we can't see. For example, if the electric rates kept going up at a certain rate, then you would be saving more money as you go on. So, and then one of the reasons that we looked at was if the occupancy or the usage of a building either went higher or lower, then we would have to adjust for that. So at that time, what the calculation was based on was what the current usage was and what the current equipment was utilizing for the month or the year. And then we had the new equipment that we replaced, and if you had 20% additional efficiency, then we would calculate the savings based on that 20%. And it was on a straight line. But as you know, the longer time frame that you look at, the capital improvement that we have done as part of this project, as the rate keeps going up, we'll be realizing additional savings as we go.
Well, okay. No, I get that part. But the issue, though, is if we don't compare it on a bill-to-bill basis, but just if we don't reset the baseline every year, in other words, what we're actually spending out. So as an example, if we're spending, just as a hypothetical, $100,000 in an electric bill for our libraries 1 year, and we have net savings, you said, of maybe it's roughly 20% or $20,000. But then the next year, instead of spending $80,000, our library hours have been expanded, which we actually just recently did. And perhaps that bill actually goes back up to the 100. We're still realizing the 20 even though we're spending the 100. And so we have on one side of the equation a realized benefit that's not really there because we're spending it, or additional costs that we're spending to make up for that savings rather than passing the savings on to our customers in terms of resetting that baseline. And so it depends on how we calculate that and the usage. The other flip side of that is perhaps we realized it's a $20,000 savings, as again in the hypothetical, and the bill's only $80,000 for the year, but the rates went up. And while the rates went up, they still go up even with a retrofit. And so say they went up $10,000, and now we're paying $90,000 to get the same electricity, although we're realizing that, and then the department is still have on their books a $20,000 savings. Then there's an imbalance if we don't have a reset every year to measure that. And then on the flip side of that is we have a certain lifespan on all retrofitting. So I don't know how we calculate the amortization in for the equipment, because every piece of retrofitting has only a certain lifespan as well. So has that analysis been looked at?
Those are all great issues, and those are the things that make this program very challenging to implement and to look in long term. So what we're doing is, on an annual basis, we'll try to calculate and try to true up all those numbers that you were asking about. And the assurance is that whatever the cost is, let's say in your example, if the library either went up or down because of the rate or usage, through the cap rates for any special funds or any special schedules, the cap rate will charge the special fund for the actual amount spent for water and electricity. So on an annual basis, they will be charged for the exact amount that they were charged for. So as you go from year 1, 2, or 3, as the rate goes up or the usage go down or whatever the ups and downs are, they will actually be only charged for what they use, so that there will be no overcharging or undercharging for any special funds or schedules.
But my concern with that is we've got retaining the interest and earnings as part of the report goes back into the fund, and I'm okay with that, but as well as the savings. And we haven't identified necessarily, we know what year 1 savings are, but there may not actually be a savings the following year, again, if rates go up and or uses go up, unless we're actually calculating, and I don't see that in the report, where we're resetting that or looking at it just on an actual dollar amount year to year. If we don't have that comparison, then we're actually, if you will, in some of these departments, whether it's fee-supported or general fund-supported departments or independent departments, that's being supplemented then to the savings account when in fact we're actually spending it on a bill. So we're being sort of charged twice on the savings that we're not actually getting. Are you following the logic?
I think I'm following. Actually, there's several issues embedded, I believe, in that question, Council Member. And I think the best answer that I can give you, not being able to answer each and every one of them, is that we're developing that capacity to be able to look at some of these avoided cost issues, to be able to track in real time through technologies that are becoming available that Department of Water and Power is putting in place as we speak. And they promise us we'll have it in place by July 21st, I think, which will involve a new billing system, that will involve new reporting capabilities. We'll have smart meters on all of the projects that we do prior to any work being done, so that I believe we will be able to show you through different types of reports how we can compare, almost like apples to apples, as opposed to looking at two different
Which is great, which would be, and I would support it moving forward if we had that in place.
Right.
And you say we're close to it, but it's not quite there yet.
Right. I believe Mr. Rosendahl made an important point. It's that everyone is struggling with these data collection and calculation issues, and we actually think we're going to get there before anybody else does. But, Jay's not going to be able to tell you next month exactly all of the questions that you're interested in, but I think that by the next time we make this report to you or to the full council in the budget process, we will be able to more accurately address those questions of the different cost factors.
Tracking
that I
it and
think you're
measuring
looking
it,
at.
recreating and resetting that baseline and
Correct.
figuring out what true savings are versus, I mean, that's my only concern in moving forward. And the last sort of question that I had is, in the report, it also says the authorization for the general manager to control all expenditures from the fund. I'm assuming there's annual audits, and if so, are those internal, are those controller audits, are those third-party independent audits, if they're audited at all?
Good afternoon. I'm Val Meloff with the Department of General Services, and the controller does have oversight over this fund as any other special fund that the city maintains. I would just also like to add that this fund will only be collecting funds in the sense of if we get grants or take loans that will in turn be used to implement green retrofit projects. The kind of accounting issues that you're talking about really have to do with the water and electricity fund, and we're going to have to, as Jay said, right-size that fund every year as part of the budget process, where we'll be using the kind of computations that we're in the process of developing to see what the savings are in the fund.
Okay. Well,
maybe I'm actually confused now, because I heard talk of avoided costs, and I don't think that was the point of Mr. Englander's question, was talking about DWP avoided costs anyway. DWP avoided costs is one of the benefits of this program that we haven't actually talked about, which is that through this program and other programs that might emulate it, and through emulation by the public of what we do in green retrofitting, there will be avoided capital investment costs that the DWP will avoid having to enter into to increase its capacity to meet our load. But what I had understood him to be asking about is the complexity of determining the savings that departments are realizing, the savings which would then go in to fund additional green retrofitting. Now, that has nothing to do with the DWP's avoided costs. That has to do with just figuring a baseline of what your electricity and water costs are, and then figuring out what costs that department is avoiding. Maybe I misunderstood the use of the terms, but when you're looking at projecting forward what the costs would have been to the department for that electricity and water use, and what it is instead because of the retrofitting, that's the vector that we're talking about putting back into the program.
Right.
Where it gets complex is in expanding capacity or utilization that the department might have. Parks being an example. We're adding parks all the time. Every park we add adds to the water usage and adds to the electricity usage. So figuring out how you quantify what that savings is is complex. But I think this is such an important program, and it's something that I'm so excited about. I'm very happy to move it forward as long as I understand what the process is going to be. You don't have to answer those questions, but what is the process going to be in order to make sure that the answers to those questions are fairly and transparently determined? I guess that's my point. Is that process itself going to be coming before us? Is it going to be coming before council? Are we going to have an opportunity to review those true-ups? That's the main concern that I have.
And thank you for articulating and lending some clarity to that. None of that process is spelled out in the report. That's all I was highlighting.
Right.
I'm comfortable as long as there was a process, but the process isn't even spelled out in the report, but there would be a process for that.
You're right. It isn't discussed in the report, but it is something that we can certainly discuss when the general manager reports annually.
Actually, Councilmember, the most important process in creating this fund is the annual reporting by the departments on all the projects that they have implemented. They will provide you with the information on what projects were done, what cost savings were actually realized, and they will recommend any additional revenues or any other special funding sources that they have tapped into, and they'll also provide you with a recommended list of programs for the next year. And this will become part of your annual budgeting process.
But
That's my main
But if I could, that's not what it says in the report, which is what's before us. It actually says that the general manager shall report to the city council regarding and identifying all revenue and expenditures to the fund as well as the purpose for each expenditure. Report shall cover fiscal year, shall be submitted 60 days. That's it. It doesn't say anything about savings. It doesn't say anything about measuring everything we just talked about. It just basically says they're going to report annually for the most part on their expenditures. So if it had those elements, I'm a little more comfortable. I mean, I think it's a great program.
Right.
I just want to make sure that we do it correctly. We're not looking back 2-3 years from now saying, we've realized the savings and it's not really there. And then we've put that savings back into the fund and then they've spent the money that wasn't really there.
Right, and if you
There's
look at
also a section that talks about how Section D, that states the general manager shall report annually on energy and other savings that result from the completed projects.
So
So in that section, we can discuss
I think how you determine the savings
Exactly.
is the most important.
Exactly.
And,
Right.
and
really important.
I think you got to the crux of the question is that, how do we determine how much money is saved and actually transferred into that? And what I'm saying is that if you look at the third recommendation on page 3, it lays out the process. But what I'm saying is that in the report, you will get the calculations for the savings, but the actual money is not transferred from water and electricity or any other funds to the departments. What you would do is, as part of the budgeting process in water and electricity fund, you will
a budget towards the savings.
Yeah, so you would actually control the cash. You would determine whether, if the library had a savings of $100,000, whether to use that to either further the project on that side, or you can take that and use that general fund money savings for any other general fund needs.
So I'm going to suggest that recommendation number 3 on page 3, I think if it's just, we don't need to wordsmith it here, but if it's amended, in the report that we're going to advance to council to encompass the concerns that Mr. Englander and I expressed about calculating the savings, to ensuring that the process for calculating the savings is part of that annual reporting process that's reported to the Budget Committee and to the council, I think, would that meet your concern?
Yeah, and if you can come up with some language before council to spell out exactly what that means and how we'll get there and the depreciation of that investment.
I would love to work with either your office or your office.
Very good.
Great, because I would love to move this forward.
Okay, so with that amendment, because Mr. Karetz is on his way, I want to go ahead. If there's no objection, then, Mr. Englander, with that amendment, we want to congratulate you for all your hard work, and Mr. Karetz, thanks for advancing this forward as well. It's a really critically important step that the city's taken, as Mr. Rosendahl said, in maintaining our leadership position in environmental sustainability. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Karetz. So that will be the action of the committee.
Great.
And that brings us then to item number 9, which has already been eloquently introduced by Ms. Maeda. So let's go ahead and bring up item number 9. Who's reporting on item 9? I think we'll need to hear from the city attorney's office, if nothing else.
You did 10 on consent.
10 and 11 on consent. Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Council Member. Greg Kong from Housing Department. Council, item number 9, request authority to formally recognize $682,480 in a settlement agreement which is a result of a lawsuit filed by Attorney Generals of 26 states, including California, against GE Funding Capital Market Services. This settlement resolved the allegation that the GE Funding Capital engaged in anti-competitive conduct in the municipal bond derivative industry. So as part of the agreement settlement, GE Funding Capital has agreed to pay $30 million, of which the city is eligible to receive $682,480. This is because the lawsuit covers a period of from 1999 and 2005, during which the city has 7 bond issuances, which has investment contract with GE Capital, Funding Capital, and its affiliates. And as a result of the alleged misconduct, the city is damaged by possibly receiving less in our investment returns from these contracts. So as a result of that, part of the settlement is to award the city of the set amount above.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Well, I guess my first question would be if you could walk through the process of the analysis and approval of this settlement, and particularly the city attorney's office's role in reviewing the settlement. And also, I'm curious why this settlement proposal hasn't come before the claims board.
Okay. City attorney is here to answer the questions about the analysis, so I will defer to her.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Gail Takahashi from the City Attorney's Office. These relate to single-family bond issuances, and I don't know if you have any specific questions. Did you want to know basically the origins of
No, I really want to know when and to what extent the city attorney's office was engaged in the settlement discussions, which from the report seem to have been conducted primarily by the housing department. And
This is not a lawsuit that involved the city at all. This was a investigation and a lawsuit by 26 attorney generals, including the Attorney General for California and GE Capital Funding and its affiliates.
Right.
There's a separate municipal derivatives lawsuit that the city is involved with. We have outside counsel, and it's still pending. Outside counsel did attempt to include GE as one of the named defendants, but the court dismissed GE from that lawsuit. So in discussions with our outside counsel for the city regarding this particular investigation by the attorneys general, the outside counsel thought it was a very good settlement for the city to take, especially since GE was dismissed from the other lawsuit. And while she is attempting to have the court reconsider adding GE, she thought that the city should take the money. Basically, she considered this as found money. And the nature of this really is the city was not harmed by the lawsuit. This is money that was part of a bond issuance that would have been the interest on the money that was deposited with the investment providers such as GE and its affiliates. Any interest that would have been earned would necessarily have to be rebated back to the IRS if the amount of the interest was exceeding the amount of the yield on the bond issuance. I know it's a little complicated, but it would not have been money that the city of LA would have been able to keep anyway. If the yield had been higher than the amount of the bond issuance, the money would have had to be rebated to the IRS. What GE did was basically there was an allegation that they artificially kept the rates low, but we don't know whether or not our bonds would have been affected or not. And again, even if we are able to go back and go through each bond issuance and prove that the rates could have been higher.
Because the more you're talking about the substance of the case, the more confused I'm getting. My question involves what the City of Los Angeles' role in this is and what the city attorney for the City of Los Angeles did in regard to the settlement. You mentioned that the city was not a party, so why is this here?
This is here because several of our bond issuances were affected in that the rates could have been, the interest rates we could have received, not the city, but the interest rates on the money that was put into these investment agreements could have generated a higher interest. Because the city is the issuer of the bond, again, we are conduit issuers of these bonds. That's why we were named as one of the parties for restitution purposes. And the city attorney's role was basically to review the settlement agreement executed between the attorney generals and GE to make sure, just to read about what it entailed. And there was already a formula established by the attorney generals as far as restitution for all the different issuers. And, it came to our office. I spoke to our outside counsel about this. And the staff,
why do we have outside counsel?
They're involved in a municipal derivatives lawsuit on a larger scale against different investment agreement providers, including GE. And I didn't want this to interfere with what the city's doing on another litigation possibly involving GE. So I double-checked with her, and she informed me that GE was dismissed from this other lawsuit. So she encouraged the city to take this. She said this is basically found money, and that's really our only role in this. And since the money is coming to the city, I spoke to LHD, and it was determined that it should just be brought up to see if Budget and Finance had any issue with the money.
Members? Mr. Rosendahl?
It's interesting what you're saying. I just want to make sure a couple of things are clear. This multi-state investigation revealed allegedly collusion and deceptive conduct by individuals during the period of 1999 through 2005 at several financial institutions, including GEFCMS. The conduct included bid rigging, agreements to refrain from bidding, and fraud. Ultimately, the conditions resulted in lower yields, lower rates of return, or less favorable terms for government and non-government organizations. The city will not need to pay attorney's fees or administrative costs under the settlement. and then the big initial is GEFCMS, is responsible for paying all the costs of administering the settlement. Now, obviously, you have no impact on the general fund because it's already included in it. So, obviously, this is ridiculous, the amount of money and all that, but what's our point on this? We accept the money, obviously. What else do we need to talk about?
Basically, it's our understanding that it's just it's a city standard procedure to come before the council and the committee when in situations like this, when we accept money, so that it's just approved by the committee and council into the fund that is recommended. In this case, this is the Municipal Housing Finance Fund, which was the fund that was receiving the investment returns from these contracts. So the settlement would rightfully, this is the fund that is impacted, so we're recommending that the settlement amounts be deposited into the same fund.
Mr. England?
I didn't really have too many questions on this. Does this conclude the whole case then? Does this cure us completely? Or does this leave any exposure?
No, the city has signed, in order to accept the settlement, the city would have to sign a release against any future claims against GE, which I believe we've already done. But this would close it.
Okay. So, do we have any option to opt out?
No.
Did we ever have an option to opt out?
We could have not accepted the settlement, yes.
Okay. And then, in that case, what would the city's range of litigation options be?
We would hope that the outside counsel would be able to convince the court to reconsider its motion to, its ruling in dismissing GE from that case. And after speaking to her, she said that there was no guarantee that the court would reconsider its motion.
Okay. So in this settlement, a settlement agreement has already been signed?
I believe so.
Okay. A check has already been received? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. The amount of money has already been budgeted in Housing Department's budget for fiscal 2013, 2014?
Correct. We have accounted for that fund.
Okay. So we've accounted for the money, we signed the settlement agreement, we have a check, and so what
Why is
you
it
need
there?
now is confirmation that I suppose the check can be deposited in the bank? What I'm getting at is there anything time-sensitive about where we are now, since the settlement agreement has already been signed, and all they're waiting on is a release of the parties at this point, I assume, right?
Correct.
Okay. Is there anything critical in the litigation time frame about getting that done now or waiting 2 weeks?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. Then, members, without objection, I'd like to hold this because I would really like to understand how the history of this better before I mean, it shouldn't impact anything since the money's already been budgeted. So, and we've received it, and that's all good. So, but I need to understand the history of this better before we move forward. So, if that's not going to cause prejudice to the parties in any way or to the city, then that's what I would like to do. Without objection, that'll be the action of the committee. So we'll hold that until whenever the next meeting is scheduled to be met.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that completes our regular agenda, and that brings us to our closed session items. So, Mr. Geist, do you have anything that's a priority? One, starting with number one? All right. Ms. Maeda, we're going to start with item number one. Before everybody closes the door, does anybody have any public...
So we're now in open session?
All right, on item number 8, the status of liability accounts, it will be the action of the committee to note and file the report. And if there's no further action before the committee, this meeting is adjourned.